Howdy everyone, and today I'll be taking a look at one of Canon's most famous and generally coveted portrait lenses, the 135mm f2 USM L. This lens has been around for a while now, so it's designed for use on Canon's full-frame and film cameras, although it can be used on Canon's less expensive APS-C digital cameras too. I've wanted to test this lens for a long time. Its 135mm focal length is medium telephoto, making it perfect for portrait photography, as well as for sports and events photography, so it's a very useful focal length for certain applications. On an APS-C camera though, 135mm is really zoomed in, the equivalent of 216mm, giving you a very tight angle of view indeed, which is probably a little less practical. But whatever kind of camera you're using, that telephoto focal length will give you very compressed backgrounds, and this lens's very bright maximum aperture of f2 means that those backgrounds can be very out of focus indeed, even when you're quite far away from your subject. In fact, when you're using it, this lens seems to give the best effect when you're far away from your subject. This is a lens that loves distance. It can give you really unique pictures that look gently beautiful, with an interesting subject isolation. It can also give you some really striking close-up pictures too, not to mention the fact that f2 is letting in quite a lot of light. Do bear in mind this lens does not have image stabilization, so you wouldn't really want to use it for handheld video work. Well, first of all, let's take a look at the lens's build quality. Typical for a Canon L lens, it's a joy to use. It's quite large and a little heavy, so it would balance much better on one of Canon's bigger camera bodies. The focus ring is large and very well damped, turning very smoothly, with just the right amount of precision. You can turn the focus ring anytime, even when the lens is set to autofocus, and the large front element does not extend or rotate as you do so. Look at that beautiful glass. The autofocus motor is very fast and very quiet, as you can hear here. If you use autofocus while you're shooting video, unfortunately the lens does make some clicking sounds as it micro-adjusts. So you might want to record sound away from the camera, but that's some pretty severe nitpicking. The lens is simple and built fantastically well. Okay, let's move on and check out the image quality. We'll start by testing it out on a full-frame camera, a 20-megapixel Canon 6D, with peripheral illumination and chromatic aberration correction both turned on. At f2, the lens is very sharp indeed in the middle of the image, presenting us with quite good colours and contrast. The resolution could be just a touch sharper if you wanted to be hypercritical, but really the picture looks fantastic. The corners? Well, the corners are just as good. This is a brilliant performance for any lens at f2. Stop the aperture down to f2.8 and the contrast and resolution levels are a touch better, and at f4 the picture quality is out of this world, showing amazing resolution and contrast. It's the same story down to f16. Because of diffraction, however, the lens is a bit softer, and at f32 the image is soft. But overall, the legends about this lens seem to be true. On a full-frame camera, it is very, very sharp indeed. Admittedly, it would be possible for it to be a little sharper wide open at f2, but few people in their right mind could complain about the quality it does offer you. It's a stellar performance on full frame. Okay, let's test the lens on an APS-C camera, in this case a 20-megapixel Canon 70D. Again with peripheral illumination and chromatic aberration correction turned on. At f2, the lens remains very sharp in the middle of the image with quite good contrast. The corners of the image are also very sharp, although if you look carefully you can see a hint of magenta chromatic aberration on those window edges. APS-C cameras do tend to emphasize chromatic aberrations, unfortunately, but still it's a lovely image. Stop the aperture down to f2.8 for a noticeable boost in sharpness, and stop down again to f4 for extremely sharp corners, and that colour fringing seems to clear off too. The lens remains sharp until about f11. Beyond that, things start to get soft. At f22, the effects of diffraction are pretty grim, but that doesn't detract from the simple fact that, on an APS-C camera, this is a very sharp lens indeed straight from f2, all the way down to f11. Considering that this is a lens from the film era, its fantastic resolution on such a challenging camera sensor is very impressive. Okay, let's look at distortion and vignetting. They are not a problem if you own an APS-C camera, so I'm testing on the harder playground of a full-frame camera. But frankly, the distortion levels are no problem at all, as the lens displays only a negligible amount of pincushion distortion. At f2 there is gentle but noticeable vignetting or darkness in the corners, but stop the lens down to f2.8 and this is all cleared up. Overall, the lens is turning in a great performance in both areas. This is definitely not a macro lens, but it can focus reasonably closely to your subject all the same. At f2, the close-up image quality is okay, although you can see hints of purple fringing. Stop down to f2.8 for more sharpness. A rather average performance here. An outright weakness of the lens is its work against bright lights. Older lens designs normally struggle to keep up in this area, and this model is definitely no exception, showing strong flaring and plummeting contrast levels. Use a lens hood whenever you can. Let's finally take a look at bokeh, or the quality of the lens's out of focus areas. As you can see here, the lens tends to exterminate any background it faces up against, but in a very pleasant way, with extremely soft looking bokeh. Even with quite difficult backgrounds, the outer focus areas always look soft and dreamy. It's close to perfection. And that sums this lens up rather well. It's built fantastically well, and it's very sharp, displaying little distortion and having a beautiful quality bokeh. It's not the easiest camera lens to use, but it is seriously rewarding, and the pictures it can give you are interesting because they look so compressed. And yet, you also get nice depth and subject isolation when you harness its narrow depth of field. If you're on the market for the best portrait lens available, then it's up to you whether you might prefer this lens or Canon's 85mm f1.2. The 85mm focal length is much more versatile, and f1.2 also lets in more than double the amount of light as f2, while also giving you such a tiny depth of field that you'll have to choose which one of your subject's eyes you want to have in focus. However, the 135mm lens will give you much simpler backgrounds, is much more useful when it comes to sports and event photography, especially because of its fast autofocus, and it costs only about half the price. In fact, the Canon 135mm f2 is very good value for money, considering just what kind of a lens you're getting. It's a truly fantastic piece of equipment, and if you're ready for the challenge, then I can't recommend it enough.